What if a single act of cruelty toward an animal could expose the darkest secret of the wealthiest family in town? A boy with nothing was given a horse no one wanted, a mare so broken, so defeated, that even seasoned ranchers had written her off as worthless. But what that horse carried inside her, and what she would do to protect the boy who saved her, would shatter the carefully constructed lies of the powerful and reveal a truth so devastating it would change an entire community forever. This is a story of loyalty that defied logic, courage that defied size, and a bond that refused to break even when the world demanded it. If you believe in the extraordinary connection between a child and a horse, please hit that like button and subscribe. It truly helps our channel grow and find more stories just like this one. The town of Bridger Falls, nestled in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains, was a place of careful divisions. On the western side, where the land rolled gentle and green, stood the sprawling estates of the cattle barons and the old money families. Their white-fenced pastures stretched for miles, dotted with champion quarter horses and prime Angus herds. The barns were pristine, painted red with white trim, their weather vanes gleaming in the afternoon sun. On the eastern side, past the railroad tracks and the shuttered textile mill, the houses grew smaller, the paint more weathered, the yards more cluttered with the debris of making do. It was a town that knew its place, and everyone in it knew theirs, except for one boy who had never learned to accept what the world told him he was worth. 10-year-old Danny Wright lived in a lopsided rental house on Maple Street, the kind of street where the maples had long since died and no one had bothered to change the sign. His father had left before Danny could remember his face, and his mother worked double shifts at the truck stop diner, her hands perpetually red from scalding dishwater, her smile tired but real. Danny was small for his age, rail thin, with a mess of brown hair that never seemed to lay flat and eyes the color of strong coffee. He was quiet in school, the kind of kid teachers forgot to call on, but his mind was sharp and his heart was stubborn. He had one dream, singular and burning. He wanted a horse, not to ride in competitions or to show off. He wanted a horse the way some kids want a dog, for the companionship, for the solid, warm reality of another living thing that might choose to stay. But horses cost money, and money was the one thing the Wright family did not have. On the western edge of town, behind iron gates with a gold-embossed letter H, stood the Holloway Ranch, 3,000 acres of prime grazing land, a mansion that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and a reputation as unshakable as the mountains themselves. Richard Holloway, at 58, was a man who measured his worth in acres and bloodlines. His face was perpetually tanned, his silver hair always perfectly combed, his boots custom-made and polished to a mirror shine. He spoke in the clipped, confident tones of a man who had never been told no and never expected to be. His wife had died young, and his only son, a pale, nervous boy named Travis, lived in the shadow of his father's expectations like a plant struggling for light. Richard Holloway collected horses the way other men collected cars. He bought the most expensive breeding stock, hired the best trainers, and displayed his champions at every county fair and regional show. Winning was not a hobby. It was a requirement. But not every horse lived up to the Holloway standard. In the far corner of the ranch, in a pen separate from the gleaming show barns, stood a mare that Richard Holloway had long since given up on. Her name, according to the registration papers, was Holloway's Golden Promise, but no one called her that anymore. The ranch hands called her the Reject, or sometimes, when they were feeling less cruel, just red for the dull copper color of her coat. She was 8 years old, a quarter horse with good lines on paper but nothing to show for it. She had been trained for barrel racing, but she was slow. She had been tried for cutting, but she spooked at cattle. She had been put to breeding, but she refused the stallion, kicking and biting with a fury that left the handlers wary. Richard Holloway, who did not tolerate failure, had declared her useless. She ate hay that could feed a valuable animal. She took up space. She was, in his words, a waste of money and time. The plan was to sell her for slaughter weight, a few $100s to a kill buyer, but even that had fallen through when she injured her left hind leg in the trailer. The vet said she would heal, but she would never be sound enough to sell. So she stood in her pen, alone, her head low, her eyes dull, waiting for nothing. Danny Wright had never been inside the Holloway Ranch. Kids like him did not get invited to places like that. But he walked past the gates every day on his way home from school, and every day he stopped. His fingers curled around the iron bars and stared. He could see the horses in the distance, sleek and glossy, and his heart ached with a longing so deep it felt like hunger. One afternoon in late April, when the dogwoods were blooming and the air smelled of cut grass and possibility, Danny saw something different. A man in a ranch jacket was leading a limping mare toward the far pen, away from the others. She was thin, her ribs visible beneath her dull coat, and she walked with her head down, defeated. Danny watched as the man shoved her roughly into the pen and latched the gate without a second glance. The mare stood motionless, not even lifting her head to the water trough. Danny's hands tightened on the bars. She looked the way he felt, forgotten. That night, lying on the sagging couch that doubled as his bed, Danny made a decision. It was a foolish decision, the kind that adults would call naive, but Danny had not yet learned to let practicality kill hope. He would ask Mr. Holloway for that horse. He did not know how he would care for her. He did not know where he would keep her. He only knew that she needed someone, and he needed her, and sometimes that was enough. The next Saturday, Danny put on his cleanest shirt, a faded blue button-up that his mother had ironed with careful hands, and walked the 2 miles to the Holloway Ranch. His stomach was a knot of nerves, his palms sweating despite the cool morning air. He stood at the gate for 10 minutes, gathering courage, before he pressed the intercom button. A crackling voice answered, "Deliveries go to the side entrance." "I'm not a delivery," Danny said, his voice small and tinny through the speaker. "I want to talk to Mr. Holloway." There was a pause, then a laugh, short and dismissive. "Kid, Mr. Holloway doesn't take meetings with door-to-door salesmen." "I'm not selling anything," Danny said, his voice stronger now, fueled by desperation. "I want to ask him about a horse." Another pause. Then, to Danny's shock, the gate buzzed and swung slowly open. He walked up the long gravel drive, his sneakers crunching on the stones. His heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. The ranch spread out around him like a kingdom, vast and manicured and utterly foreign. He passed a barn where a trainer was working a glossy black stallion in a round pen, the horse's muscles rippling, the man's voice sharp and commanding. He passed paddocks where mares grazed with their foals, the babies all legs and curiosity. He passed workers in clean uniforms raking gravel and mending fences, and none of them looked at him. He was invisible here. Finally, he reached the main house. It was not just a house. It was a statement, stone and timber and glass, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front, rocking chairs positioned like sentries. Standing on that porch, arms crossed, was Richard Holloway. He was wearing jeans that probably cost more than Danny's mother made in a week, a crisp white shirt, and an expression of vague amusement, as if a stray dog had wandered onto his property, and he was deciding whether to be entertained or annoyed. "You're the kid from the intercom," Richard said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir," Danny said, stopping at the base of the porch steps. He craned his neck to meet the man's eyes. "My name is Danny Wright." "I know who you are," Richard said, and something in his tone made Danny's skin prickle. "Your mother works at the truck stop. I've seen her." Danny nodded, unsure if this was good or bad. "What do you want, Danny Wright?" Richard asked, and there was a sharpness beneath the casual tone, a test. Danny took a breath. His hands were shaking, so he shoved them into his pockets. "I want to ask about the mare," he said. "The one in the far pen, the one that's limping." Richard's eyebrows rose, genuine surprise flickering across his face. "That horse?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because," Danny said, and the words came out in a rush, unpolished and desperate. "I think she needs someone, and I think I could take care of her. I know I don't have money, but I could work. I could do chores. I could—" Richard held up a hand, and Danny stopped. The man studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had just thought of something amusing. "That horse is worthless," Richard said flatly. "She's lame. She's stubborn. She's got no talent and no future. She eats and takes up space. That's all she does." "She's still a horse," Danny said, his voice quiet but firm. Richard laughed, a short, barking sound. "You want her? Fine. She's yours." Danny's heart leapt. "Really?" "On one condition," Richard said, and now his smile widened, sharp and cold. "You take her today, right now. And you never bring her back here. I don't want to hear about her again. She's your problem." Danny nodded, so fast his head felt light. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Richard turned and called over his shoulder, "Travis, get down here." A moment later, a boy appeared in the doorway. Travis Holloway was 12, 2 years older than Danny, but he looked younger, softer, his face pale and anxious. He wore expensive clothes that hung awkwardly on his thin frame, and he looked at his father with the wary expression of someone expecting to be criticized. "Take this boy to the far pen," Richard said. "Give him the mare. Halter, lead rope, and get her out of here." Travis nodded silently and descended the steps. He did not look at Danny. The two boys walked in silence toward the pen. The mare stood where Danny had last seen her, motionless, her head low. Up close, she looked even worse. Her coat was dull and patchy, her mane tangled with burrs, her left hind leg held slightly off the ground. Her eyes were half closed, as if she had given up even the effort of seeing. Travis opened the gate and stepped inside, holding a frayed halter. The mare did not move. "Come on," Travis muttered, slipping the halter over her head. She did not resist. She simply stood there, a living ghost. Travis handed the lead rope to Danny. Their eyes met for the first time, and Danny saw something unexpected in the older boy's face. Envy. "She's all yours," Travis said, his voice flat. Then, quieter, almost a whisper. "Good luck." Danny took the rope. The mare's head was so low the rope hung slack. "Come on, girl," Danny said softly. He tugged gently. The mare took one shuffling step, then another. They walked slowly down the long drive, past the pristine barns and the glossy horses and the workers who paused to stare. Danny did not look back. He had no trailer, no truck, no plan. He had 2 miles to walk and a lame horse that barely seemed alive. But she was his, and that was enough. The walk took over an hour. The mare moved slowly, each step cautious, her breathing labored. Danny talked to her the whole way, his voice low and steady, telling her about his house, about his mother, about the empty lot behind the abandoned church where he thought he could keep her. He told her she was going to be okay. He did not know if he believed it, but he said it anyway. By the time they reached Maple Street, the sun was high and Danny's shirt was soaked with sweat. His neighbors, sitting on sagging porches and patched-up lawns, stared openly. A horse was not a common sight on this side of town. "Where'd you get that?" Old Mr. Tibbs called from his porch, his voice scratchy with cigarettes and curiosity. "She was given to me," Danny called back, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable. His mother was standing in the doorway when he arrived, her face a mixture of shock and dismay. "Danny," she said, her voice tight, "what have you done?" "I got a horse, Mama," Danny said, breathless and beaming. His mother looked at the mare, at her son, and then at the mare again. She saw the ribs, the dull eyes, the trembling legs. She saw a problem they could not afford. But she also saw her son's face, alight with a joy she had not seen in years, and she felt her resolve crack. "We can't keep a horse, baby," she said, but her voice was already losing its certainty. "I'll take care of her," Danny said, his words tumbling over each other. "I'll find food. I'll build her a shelter. I'll do everything. Please, Mama, please." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she sighed, a sound of surrender and love. "1 month," she said. "If we can't manage, she has to go." Danny threw his arms around her waist. "Thank you," he whispered. She rested her hand on his head, her eyes on the broken mare, and wondered what she had just agreed to. The empty lot behind the abandoned church was overgrown with weeds and scattered with trash, but it had a rusted fence still mostly intact and a small lean-to shed that had once stored lawn equipment. Danny spent the rest of the day clearing the lot, pulling trash, cutting weeds with a borrowed machete, his hands blistering and his back aching. His mother brought him water and watched from the fence line, shaking her head but not stopping him. By nightfall, the lot looked almost livable. Danny filled an old bathtub he found in the alley with water from a neighbor's hose and scattered the last of the hay bale Mr. Tibbs had donated from his own chicken supply. The mare drank deeply, her first sign of interest, and nibbled at the hay. Danny sat on an overturned crate and watched her. "I'm going to call you Rusty," he said, "because of your color. And because you're a little broken right now, but that's okay. Rust can be cleaned off." The mare flicked an ear toward him, the first acknowledgement she had given. It was enough. That night, Danny lay on the couch and stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He had a horse. He had no money, no experience, and no idea what he was doing. But he had a horse. And tomorrow he would figure out the rest. The next weeks were a lesson in stubborn determination. Danny woke before school to check on Rusty, mucking the small shelter with a shovel and wheelbarrow he borrowed from the church caretaker. He spent his lunch money on hay, going hungry at school, telling his mother he had eaten when he had not. He read every book on horses the library had, staying late after school, his nose buried in faded pages that smelled of dust and old glue. He learned about hoof care, about feeding, about the signs of colic and founder. He learned that horses were expensive, fragile, and demanding. He learned that love was not enough, but he tried anyway. Rusty, for her part, remained a ghost. She ate, she drank, She stood in the corner of the lot with her head low. She did not whinny. She did not approach Danny. She simply existed, a hollowed-out version of what a horse should be. Danny brushed her every evening, working the tangles from her mane, talking to her in a low, steady voice. She tolerated it, but she did not respond. It was like brushing a statue. "She's broken," Mr. Tibbs said one afternoon, leaning on the fence, watching Danny work. "Some things can't be fixed, boy." "She's not broken," Danny said, his jaw set. "She's hurt. That's different." Mr. Tibbs shrugged and walked away. But Danny's mother, watching from the kitchen window, saw the way her son's hands trembled as he ran the brush over Rusty's scarred hide, and she prayed he was right. Then, on a warm evening in May, when the fireflies were just beginning to blink in the dusk, something changed. Danny was sitting on the crate, reading aloud from a book about wild mustangs, his voice carrying across the quiet lot. Rusty stood in her usual corner, her head low, her eyes half closed. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, she turned her head. She looked at Danny. Not past him, not through him. At him. Their eyes met. Danny stopped reading. "Hey, girl," he whispered. Rusty took one step toward him, then another. Her movements were slow, cautious, but deliberate. She crossed the small lot and stopped in front of Danny, her muzzle inches from his face. Danny held his breath. Then, with a gentleness that made his throat tighten, Rusty lowered her head and rested it against his chest. The weight of her, the warmth of her, the simple, solid reality of her trust, broke something open inside Danny. He wrapped his arms around her neck and cried, silent tears soaking into her coarse mane. She did not pull away. She stood there, holding him up, and for the first time in her life, she chose to stay. "I've got you," Danny whispered. "I've got you." And in that moment, the bond was forged, not out of money or bloodlines or ribbons, out of two broken things choosing to heal each other. But the world was not kind to broken things, and the peace would not last. Richard Holloway had forgotten about the mare the moment she left his property, but his son, Travis, had not. Travis Holloway lived in a cage of expectations. His father demanded excellence, and Travis provided mediocrity. He was not a talented rider. He was not a charismatic speaker. He was not, in his father's eyes, a proper heir. He tried desperately to earn his father's approval, but it was like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. Recently, his father had bought him a new horse, an expensive young stallion meant for competitive reining. Travis was expected to train with it, to bond with it, to win with it. But the stallion was headstrong and quick-tempered, and Travis was afraid of it. Every training session ended with his father's disappointed scowl. Every failure added to the weight on Travis's shoulders. And then, one afternoon, Travis saw Danny Wright riding past the ranch gates on a rusted bicycle, his face lit with joy, and Travis felt something dark and ugly coil in his chest. That useless mare, the one his father had thrown away like trash, was still alive. And worse, she looked happy. Travis had seen her from the road, standing in that pathetic little lot, her head up, her ears forward, watching the boy with an attention she had never given anyone at the Holloway Ranch. It was an insult, a humiliation. If that worthless horse could thrive with a poor kid in a vacant lot, what did that say about the Holloway Ranch? What did that say about Travis? He went to his father that night. "The mare," Travis said carefully, "the one you gave away. I saw her in town." Richard looked up from his desk, his expression bored. "So?" "She's on public land," Travis lied, the words bitter on his tongue, Behind the old church, there's no permit, no proper fencing. It's a liability." Richard's eyes narrowed. He understood liability. "Is that so?" "People are talking," Travis continued, embellishing now, feeding his father's pride. "They're saying you gave away a lame horse to a kid who can't care for it, that it reflects poorly on the ranch." Richard Holloway's jaw tightened. He did not tolerate anything that reflected poorly on his name. "I'll handle it," he said curtly. Travis nodded and left, and the guilt he felt was swallowed quickly by the satisfaction. If he could not succeed, at least he could ensure that others failed too. 3 days later, Danny came home from school to find a white truck parked outside the lot. The words Bridger Falls Animal Control were stenciled on the side in official black letters. A man in a tan uniform was standing at the fence, clipboard in hand, talking to Danny's mother. Her face was pale, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Mama," Danny said, his voice rising in panic. He dropped his backpack and ran. "What's going on?" The animal control officer, a middle-aged man with a tired face and no patience for drama, turned to Danny. "You the owner of the horse?" "She's mine," Danny said, his heart pounding. "We've had a complaint," the officer said, flipping through pages on his clipboard. "Inadequate shelter, no veterinary care, and this lot isn't zoned for livestock. I'm going to have to impound the animal." "No," Danny said, the word loud and sharp. "You can't. Son, I don't make the rules. I enforce them. This horse needs proper care, and you don't have the means to provide it." "She's fine," Danny said desperately, climbing over the fence. Rusty, sensing his distress, walked toward him, her ears forward, her eyes alert. "Look at her. She's healthy. She's happy." The officer looked, and he had to admit, the mare did look better than he had expected from the complaint. She was still thin, but her eyes were bright, her coat cleaner, her posture confident, but the rules were the rules. "I'm sorry," the officer said, and he sounded like he meant it. "If you can provide proof of ownership, a vet check, and proper zoning permits, you can appeal. But right now, she has to come with me." "I'll get the papers," Danny's mother said quickly, her voice shaking. "I'll get whatever you need. Just give us time." The officer hesitated. Then he sighed. "You have 72 hours, he said. "After that, she goes to auction." "I'm sorry." He left. Danny stood in the empty lot, his hand shaking, Rusty's head pressed against his shoulder. His mother put her arm around him, and they stood there in the failing light. Two people with nothing, facing a system designed to crush them. "We'll figure it out," his mother whispered, but her voice was hollow. Danny said nothing. He just held on to Rusty and tried not to break. The next morning, Danny did not go to school. He walked straight to the library and found the librarian, a kind woman named Miss Delgado who had always let him stay past closing time. "I need help," he said, and he told her everything. Miss Delgado listened, her face growing more serious with each word. When he finished, she nodded once. "Let me make some calls," she said. By noon, she had connected Danny with a retired veterinarian who agreed to examine Rusty for free, a local lawyer who specialized in pro bono cases, and a county clerk who explained the permit process. It was not a solution, but it was a start. The vet, Dr. Hayes, arrived that afternoon. He was an old man with gnarled hands and sharp eyes, and he examined Rusty with a thoroughness that made Danny's stomach churn. He checked her teeth, her hooves, her legs. He listened to her heart and lungs. He asked Danny questions about her diet, her behavior, her history. Finally, he straightened up and wiped his hands on a rag. "This horse," he said, "was neglected for years. But she's recovering. Whoever's been caring for her recently is doing a damn good job." Danny felt his throat tighten. "So she's okay?" "She's got an old injury in that hind leg. She'll always limp a little. But she's sound enough for light work. She's not suffering." Dr. Hayes scribbled on a form and handed it to Danny. "Here's your vet certification. You've got a healthy horse." Danny took the paper with trembling hands. "Thank you," he whispered. Dr. Hayes smiled. "Thank your horse," he said. "She's a survivor." But the permits were a different problem. The lot was not zoned for livestock, and changing the zoning required fees, inspections, and time Danny did not have. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Ortiz, reviewed the case and shook her head. "The complaint was filed by Richard Holloway," she said. "He claims the horse is still technically his property, since there was no formal bill of sale." Danny felt the ground drop out from under him. "But he gave her to me." "Did you get that in writing?" Danny's silence was answer enough. Miss Ortiz leaned back in her chair. "This is a property dispute, and without documentation, it's your word against a very wealthy man's. I'm sorry." Danny walked home in a daze. 72 hours had become 48, and he was no closer to saving Rusty. That night, he lay on the couch and stared at the ceiling, and for the first time he let himself imagine losing her. The tears came hard and silent, and he buried his face in the pillow so his mother would not hear. But she heard anyway, and she sat beside him, her hand on his back, and she made a decision. The next morning, Danny's mother put on her best dress, the one she wore to church on Easter, and walked to the Bridger Falls Gazette. She asked to speak to the editor. She told him everything. That night, the story ran on the front page. "Local boy fights to keep rescued horse." It included a photo of Danny and Rusty, his arms around her neck, her head resting on his shoulder. The article detailed the Richard Holloway's gift of the mare, the lack of documentation, and the sudden complaint. It asked a single, pointed question. Why would a man give away a horse, then try to take it back? The response was immediate. By the next morning, the Gazette's phone lines were overwhelmed. People called to offer donations for permits and vet care. Others called to express outrage at Holloway's actions. The story was picked up by regional news stations, and suddenly Bridger Falls was watching. Richard Holloway, sitting in his pristine office, read the article with a face like carved stone. His phone rang incessantly. His reputation, carefully cultivated over decades, was cracking, and all because of a worthless mare and a stubborn boy. He called his lawyer. "Make this go away," he said. But the lawyer, reading the public mood, shook his head. "You gave the horse away, Richard, in front of witnesses. If you pursue this, you'll lose in court and in public opinion. Let it go." Richard Holloway was not a man who let things go, but he was a man who understood when a fight would cost more than it was worth. He hung up the phone and stared out the window at his perfect ranch, and he felt something he had not felt in years. Shame. That afternoon, a courier arrived at Danny's house with an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery and a signed bill of sale transferring ownership of the mare to Danny Wright. The note read simply, "She was always yours." Danny held the paper and cried, this time from relief. Rusty was safe. She was his, and no one could take her away. The months that followed were a transformation. With donations from the community, Danny was able to secure the proper permits, repair the fence, and build a real shelter. Rusty, with consistent care and love, continued to heal. Her coat grew glossy, her weight returned, and her limp, while still present, became less pronounced. But the most remarkable change was in her spirit. She was no longer the defeated ghost Danny had first led down Maple Street. She was alert, playful, even mischievous. She greeted Danny every morning with a soft nicker, nuzzling his pockets for the apple slices he always brought. She followed him around the lot like a dog, her presence a constant, comforting shadow. Danny learned to ride her, not in a competition ring, but bareback through the empty fields beyond town, the wind in his face and her steady gait beneath him. They were two outcasts who had found each other, and together they were whole. The story spread beyond Bridger Falls. A regional magazine ran a feature on Danny and Rusty, titled "The Mare No One Wanted and the Boy Who Saved Her." It included a follow-up interview with Dr. Hayes, who noted that Rusty's recovery was not just physical but emotional, a testament to the power of compassionate care. Richard Holloway read the article in silence, and for the first time in years he questioned what he valued. His son, Travis, read it too, and he felt the ugly coil of envy loosen into something softer. Regret, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. One afternoon, Travis appeared at the fence of Danny's lot. Danny was brushing Rusty, humming under his breath, and he looked up in surprise when he saw the older boy. They stared at each other for a long moment. "I'm sorry," Travis said finally, his voice low, "for what I did, for telling my dad." Danny considered him, then he nodded. "She's okay now," he said simply. Travis looked at Rusty, at the way she leaned into Danny's touch, at the trust in her eyes. "She looks happy," he said quietly. "She is," Danny said. Travis nodded, and something in his face shifted. He turned to leave, then paused. "You did good," he said. "Better than any of us." And then he walked away. Danny watched him go, then turned back to Rusty. "Come on, girl," he said softly. "Let's go for a ride." If this powerful story moved you, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another inspiring tale of courage, hope, and the extraordinary bonds between humans and horses. Share this video with a friend who would love this story.